And lastly, he points out that Wilberforce in the British colonies, who was almost single-handedly responsible for ending the slave trade and slavery, was an immediatist in principle, but an incrementalist in practice, just like pro-lifers in the movement are today. Klusendorf says, Wilberforce pursued both strategies simultaneously, as do pro-lifers today. He did not compromise on principle, only on tactics and strategy. When you don't have the votes, you get what you can while you continue working for complete victory. For example, Wilberforce supported legislation to refit slave ships to reduce suffering.
Okay, the reworking of the immediatist label there. It's so subtle, but it's like an immediatist in principle while being an incrementalist or a gradualist in practice. It's like, no. Like it's opposing gradualism. Those things are opposites. You can't be a immediatist in principle while acting against the immediatism that you espouse.
And to make all these claims with so much surety and confidence in his voice is just bewildering to me. Like, as someone who's read Wilberforce, like we're talking like okay, so right here,
your desk is like completely covered in Wilberforce books all the time,
and it's so complex that it's like I don't even like know how to deal with this because different people are saying different things and they're quoting themselves or they're quoting movies and all this kind of stuff, and sometimes I don't understand their arguments because they're so bad. But so here we have, this is May 1789. Wilberforce's first speech, right? And this is the letter on the abolition of the slave trade, which is the last thing that he wrote on it, which was the year before the passage of the 1808 Bill of Abolition, abolishing the slave trade, right? What's so crazy is he's saying this with such confidence, but in this speech and in this book that go the entire career, Wilberforce calls himself an immediate abolitionist and contrasts himself with the people trying to regulate the slave trade and argues specifically that the things that he says that Wilberforce is supporting at the same time were folly.
Yeah.
And it's there in the historical record. You can buy the books. You can go to the library and get the books. You can get on Google and you can get it. You can go to James Silberman's articles. It's just historically false that Wilberforce was like putting forward bills, because the way, like, if you just watch this, it's like Klusendorf and Gruber are making the claim that Wilberforce went into Parliament every year with a bill of abolition in one hand and a bill of regulation or gradualism in the other hand.
Yeah.
And just did both.
Yeah.
That's what you would think that's what they did. But what it was is he went in with a bill of abolition each year, and just like we do, and put it forward, and the people who opposed abolition came up with amendments to it, or said we should pass it but gradually, or we should do something else. Alternative substitute bills, and voted for them instead. And Wilberforce was like, dang it.
Yeah.
Why are we refitting slave ships? Why don't we just abolish it? That's why he came back the next year, the next session that he could, and put forward the bill abolishing the trade. And I did this. I mean, I'm doing this because we're going to work on something now to really put this to bed. But he never authored any bill. Wilberforce never authored a bill regulating the slave trade. He wrote against them.
Yeah.
Right? Other abolitionists or other people, just like today, did. And that was something they did instead of abolition. But to argue so confidently, it's like brazenly, it's like they think that their hearers are either so historically ignorant or not going to like test what they're saying, that they're just going to get away with it.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
But
and just think about what Seth Gruber said here in this video, and then this quote, if it lines up with this is from Wilberforce, if it lines up with him at all. Let me be forgiven if I speak strongly where I feel so deeply. It is not only because the gradual abolitionists have been, in fact, the only real stay of that system of wickedness and cruelty which we wish to abolish, though that assertion is unquestionably true, but it is trying beyond expression that they should be the real maintainers of the slave trade, who reprobate it in terms of detestation as strong as any which we ourselves can utter. That's not that stance right there against the gradual abolitionists is not a principled immediatism, but a pragmatic gradualism. He's saying this is the thing that's keeping slavery legal.
Yeah. He's saying the same thing that we say about incrementalists today.
That incrementalists get really mad at us for.
Yep. And he wrote, a few pages earlier there, he writes that the gradualists were the only stay of that system of wickedness. Just a page earlier, he says, it is they who proved, in fact, the most efficient supporters of the slave trade. Not the slave traders, not the slave lobbyists. It is the gradualists who proved to be, in fact, the most effective supporters of the slave trade. The pro-lifers of our day, the pro-lifers of his day, were the most effective supporters of slavery.
Yeah. So just to get back, without getting into the arguments, because there's a certain sense where it's like what different people in history learned and did kind of matters because it's instructive, but we don't base our arguments on it, because we definitely don't think that Wilberforce or Garrison or any one of those people are perfect on everything. But I'm just saying you can't. It's particularly annoying when people lie about people in history when it's so blatant. So I'm just going to read this. Keep in mind what he said. This is page 301 from the letter on the abolition of the slave trade. Quote, "Let me also remind these gentlemen that if we, immediate abolitionists, conceive them, the gradual abolitionists, to be, though unintentionally, the real practical friends and supporters of the slave trade, we are at least not the only persons who hold that opinion." And then he goes in to say that the West Indian slave traders themselves found the bills regulating the slave trade to be beneficial. But Wilberforce argues, and he calls himself an immediate abolitionist. He contrasts himself with the gradual abolitionist, and then he says that the gradual abolitionists were the ones keeping slavery the slave trade from being abolished. This is literally the same exact argument that we make about Greg Treat or Jeff Leach or anyone.
Yep.
And here we've got Klusendorf via Gruber saying something that is just completely unsupportable.
I think it started with Clark Forsyth, and then pro-lifers like Greg Cunningham and Scott Klusendorf and Gruber kind of rely on the historical account of Wilberforce by Forsyth.
Yeah.
And so then they're all just repeating these lies that originally, I think it was Forsyth. Forsyth may have got it from somebody else, but I think it starts with Clark
But
Forsyth.
they do, but there's a sort of like confidence that it's true.
Yeah.
That like, and whenever I first encountered this way back in the day, it just kind of, it floored me because I didn't know, because I came from the academic world where there was a certain cost to your reputation if you got up and said something that was just historically blatantly known to be false by pretty much everyone else in the field. Like, there's no one in the field of the history, the historiography of abolitionism who does not understand this very stark line between immediatist and gradualist.
Yeah.
And that they try to convolute it and say that the very definers of those terms did both. I'm just like, the only audience you're ever going to get away with this is going to be like an unthinking, sycophantic, I'm just going to believe whatever you say because I want what you say to be true kind of audience. No criticalism.
They don't even have a category for immediatists or gradualists in history because of what they do with this. They make it so that there's no real distinction. Like, because Wilberforce in their mind would just be okay with whatever the gradualists are doing, there's no way that you actually separate them. And so you don't actually know how to place those things in history anymore because they're all just principled or pragmatic gradualists, but principled immediatists. Everyone's really just them at the end of the day.
Yeah. And when you think about Amazing Grace, the Wilberforce movie, which is awful in a lot of ways historically, but it's good drama. Even in that movie, the bad guy is the gradual abolitionist. How does the pro-lifer watching that movie come out of that thinking that Wilberforce is the gradualist or the both and guy? I don't know. You guys used to be pro-lifers. What did you think? Like when you watched that movie, did you think, yeah, Wilberforce is, I mean, it's just.
I think it was like Total Blinders. It's like, what?
Yeah, I just didn't pay attention.
Not even-
Anyway, you were going to read another quote
Yeah,
from.
well, he doesn't just go after gradualists. He actually goes after the gradual bill. Like, so the bill, the slave ship regulation bill that Klusendorf writes about, that Gruber quotes, Wilberforce writes about that bill. Here's what Wilberforce said about that bill. He says, "The slave-carrying bill was a measure which a very few years after was acknowledged, as it still is universally confessed, to have been beneficial to the West Indian body." That being the slave traders in the West Indian colonies. So he's saying the slave-carrying bill helped them, right? And he explains elsewhere in the book, which is really, really good, which you guys can probably find online, a letter on the abolition of the slave trade. He's writing in here that these incremental bills serve as half measures, which kind of assuage the consciences of the people and of the legislators, and serve to really dull the enthusiasm of the abolitionist movement, which served, as he found very clearly, these regulations were used as substitutes for his abolition bill to say, look, we're doing something about slavery. Yeah, we're not doing Wilberforce's crazy thing, but we're doing something. And those were used as the excuses not to abolish the trade.